repair what's actually happening. And if we leave the scab there, then the scab will eventually fall off of its own will, if you like, at the right time. So that's the same thing that happens with a heart, and I call that the heart being able to process things. So initially, when we're hurt, the heart, a healthy heart can process those things, and then at the right time, the heart can say, all better now, and we don't need to worry about this hidden stuff. So that's a natural process. But what happens for some people, what happens is that they see that the scab is on their wound, and they pull the scab off, and they have an open wound, and they're poking the open wound, and all they're doing is creating more hurt, and they're stopping the healing. And people do that in their hearts as well. So they have a wound, and they pull up their wound, and they show everybody their wound, and they poke it away at it, and so go, look how it's hurting me, and I'm really hurt, and all that sort of thing. And they probably are really feeling pain because of that. But because they're doing that, they're stopping the natural healing process, and they're keeping that wound alive. So even though the trauma has gone, even though the cause of the wound and the hurt is gone, because they keep focusing on that thing, then that thing is still alive, and it's maintained as alive. And if they stopped focusing on the hurt, one of the things they find is that the pain actually becomes less, and the heart has an opportunity to heal. So one of the biggest problems to people, biggest barriers to people getting healed, this privileged way of thinking that somehow I deserve to feel the way that I feel, and that everybody else should sympathize with me about that. It's funny how in the New Testament, Jesus actually never talks about sympathy or empathy. He talks about compassion. And the differences between those is sympathy is that, I'm feeling with you, I understand what you're going through. And empathy is, I have the same things as you, I feel the same as you. Whereas compassion, so as people that are helping other people, we should have compassion. Now, compassion is, I love you, and I'm concerned that you're in this place, and I want to confront those issues that you have, so that we can see healing. So sympathy and empathy don't lead to healing. They lead to status quo. Whereas compassion always wants the person's best. They always want the person to see freedom come about. And we need to have compassion for ourselves rather than sympathy for ourselves. Sympathy for ourselves is self-indulgent. Compassion for ourselves is a determination to actually beat this thing. Okay, when I set goals, let's roll back. My language changes to express positive emotions. So my language changes from the rules type of language. I have responsibilities, I have to do this, I need to do this, and it changes from there to I'm investing in the future, I love to do these kind of things, I just want to. And so we have this less driven language of the hard-hearted person to the soft language of a person is, I enjoy being with you, I enjoy what I'm doing, and if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing, I can see the good result, and the language is coming out that I'm always looking forward, I'm either looking forward to a better future, or I have a better future now. Now, when I set goals that my heart doesn't agree with, it always leads to trouble as well. So when there's this disconnect between the heart and the mind, then we're going to have one of two things happen. Either the mind has to actually repent, the mind has to change so that the heart can rule, or the heart is made silent and ignored. And as we've talked about, that doesn't actually work too well. And in fact, in James, he talks about a double-minded man, and this is the double-minded man. The double-minded man thinks one thing, but in his heart he thinks another thing. Just one last point there is that people always seek to find a reason for the way they feel. Now, as I said before, if I have a wound in my arm and it hurts and everything else, and I don't know why that came there, I try to create stories why my wound came there. And there have been times where I've been I have extreme itching on the back of my neck, and I don't know what's going on, and I think up all these things, and then a big lump comes up, and I realize that an insect has bitten me. But it seems really important that we actually find out why these things happen. And I'm going to say that there's a real danger to that. And because one thing is that as soon as we find out why, as soon as we have the diagnosis, then there seems to be this, okay, now I'm satisfied. And the drive for healing is not there anymore. The other reason is that we have, in the emotion world at least, we have this problem that the emotions we have, I might have an angry emotion, and I might create the story about what somebody has done to me to justify my angry emotion. And so that story is lies. And we start believing those lies. And when we start believing those lies, we can never actually challenge the emotion itself. Healing happens when the inner hurts are brought into the light. Now, I've kind of been alluding to this a little bit, but what does it mean by light? Well, it means it has to be a safe, reassuring place, and this is basically what all counsellors are aiming for, is to have that safe place. And I'm saying that bring it to God's light is the best thing, because He has understanding, and He also has access to our spirits, who have access to the lower levels of our heart, which we don't have access to. So that's the advantage there. But one thing I'd say about the safe, reassuring place is that when our hearts have been ignored and when our hearts have been silenced, they've been silenced because there hasn't been a safe place for us. So our minds, our conscious self, have not provided, or our lifestyle hasn't provided a safe place for our hearts to have an expression. So what that means is that there cannot ever be healing because of that. So one of the first things to do, if you have wounds or hurts, the first thing to do towards healing is to actually acknowledge those things and value the heart's expression of those things. And to reassure the heart, and I won't go into that too much, but we can reassure the heart to encourage the heart to give more expression. Now, having more expression, as the next piece kind of talks about, having more expression means that our heart has to take responsibility for the things that it's bringing up. And if we've created a false story, then there's no responsibility taken. So we have to resist this concept of putting reason behind what it is, but just to name what it is. And when you name what it is, that brings it into the light. And when you bring it into the light, then your heart and your mind can actually become one, okay? And when your heart and mind become one and your heart's being valued, the natural repair process can start, and we can start to grow emotionally and start to grow, so grow scabs over the wounds, if you like, and away we go. And before we get into responsibility, I just thought I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between a heart hurt and a heart wound. So if I go into battle and I'm wounded, it means somebody's taken a sword and gone, and blood's coming out. That's generally what I'm saying a wound is. A wound is something that has been done to us, and it's something that the Bible talks about two types of people. It talks about the prisoner that is in prison because they've done something wrong, and the person that's held captive, and people are held captive because of an external force. So this is kind of like the difference between the wounds and the hurts. So a wound is something that somebody's done externally to us, whereas a hurt is something that can still be external, but basically it happens because of an accident. I get run over and I break my leg. I do something silly, jump out of a tree and fall on the ground. So when I talk about hurts and wounds, I'm talking about the things that we do to ourselves or as a natural consequence of life, and the things that other people force on us and cause those things. So I'm talking about both those types of things. Okay, so responsibility. So a person that takes responsibility is the person that is on the road to healing. And I said this right at the start, that Adam and Eve were good examples of a few things. And here's another good example. So Adam and Eve have a conversation with God on a daily basis before they ate the fruit. And then after the fruit, there's one conversation that God has with them. So they run off and hide. And if you actually just read that story from the point of view of an emotional hurt, then there'll be lots of insight in there about how they reacted to being emotionally hurt. And I just wanted to point out that what they felt was not guilt. They didn't feel guilty for eating the fruit. They felt shame, and it's the shame that made them go and hide. And very often it's in fact, in this culture, in New Zealand culture and cultures around the world, we're moving away from a guilt consciousness that I've done something wrong to a shame consciousness. So all our laws are moving away from laws of right and wrong that are showing us how we've been wrong, and trying to emphasize that we've done wrong, to ones of shame and that we don't fit in society, we're not part of that particular branch of society or everything else. And laws that help minorities will be about removing of shame and that kind of thing. So the whole world is moving towards a shame-based society. Now, Hebrew society was shame-based and not guilt-based. So this conversation was about shame, that's all. And the way they reacted was typical shame stuff. And some of it makes me laugh. I mean, they made some cloak out of leaves, and what happens when it comes to autumn and the leaves dry up? So you have this picture that shame causes people to cover up, but that cover up isn't actually that good, and it's only temporary, and then they have to recover up and then recover up. And it's the act of having to continually cover over, which causes re-triggering. It causes people to feel more shame, and it goes deeper and deeper into shame. So it actually becomes a cycle. And what God did is He created animal clothes, and those animal clothes were more durable and lasted a lot longer. So there's even there, the mercy of God not just covers the shame, but actually changes the cover to be more of a permanent feature rather than something that's temporary. But anyway, that's just a little bit of a side. So after the fall, the conversation between God and Adam and Eve was one that basically says, who stole the lollies? Was it you, Adam? Adam says, no, it wasn't me. It was that woman you put here with me. And God says to the woman, who stole the lollies? And the woman says, no, it wasn't me. It was that snake that was in the garden. And there was a snake in the garden. And God did allow the snake in the garden. And there's lots of things I can talk about that. And God says to the snake, you are cursed. He actually did not give the snake an opportunity to take responsibility, because that's one of the differences between Adam and Eve and all the other creatures around, is that one of responsibility. Anyway, don't go to there either. Cain and Abel. So after the fall, Cain and Abel were brothers, and they went out, and Cain didn't like the fact that Abel had heard from God in a better manner. So if you read that carefully, that's what the problem is. It says that Abel heard from God about the time of harvest, and Cain also brought some stuff, and God didn't find that very good. So Cain killed Abel, and then God visited Cain. And for those that think that Adam and Eve were taken out of the garden because God couldn't look on their sin, then what's God doing chasing Cain after he's murdered Abel? Just saying. God did not call Cain a murderer. He didn't actually name a name to get him to feel guilty. What he did was he gave an opportunity for Cain to take responsibility for what he did. And Cain didn't feel shame, nor did he feel guilt, and he didn't take responsibility. But the grace of God, the goodness of God, even so, the goodness of God said to Cain, well, you're a murderer. And Cain complains to God and says, well, I'm a murderer, but everybody's going to be after me, all the family. And God says, no, I'll protect you. So even in a hurt heart condition, so his hurt is self-inflicted. Okay, he's a murderer, and that causes hurt. Even in that condition, God still provides certain care. His route to healing was taking responsibility, which he didn't take. Healing happens when I'm honest and responsibility is taken, and we listen to what God says. But like I said, that's primarily wise, because he has the in-track, he has the inside voice, and he can speak directly to these things. And we believe and agree with what he says about us. And this is about, so if you like, what we have is we have God at one end, talking up to our heart, and we have a mind at the other end that's a soft heart that's listening to our heart and agreeing with what God says. So now we have this complete agreement, body, soul, spirit, if you like, and this agreement is agreeing with what God says. And that will actually bring healing. And it will bring fast healing too. I spoke to a woman a long time ago, and we were just talking about emotional healing, I guess. And one of the things I said, and she talked about, things take time and stuff like this. And I said, you can have as much of God as you like. When he was on earth, he did miracles where people were instantly changed. He wants to instantly change us right now. And so this process of being open, taking responsibility, becoming emotionally more mature, and allowing healing to come can be instantaneous because he is a supernatural God. But if you don't want that, then it can still happen at a slower rate. It can happen as fast as you want. Being honest is saying about what's underneath, like I said. If there are hurts, they are either there because... so this is important, okay? What I'm basically saying here is that it is possible that trauma is ongoing. It is possible that imprisonment, captivity, bondage, and physical abuse, emotional abuse is still going on. And if that is the case, then we need to change our lifestyle to be safe. I was talking to, we were talking about parenting to a bunch of parents, I guess, and this lady had two sons. One of them was in jail, and she was about to testify in court against the other son that would send him to jail as well. And this is a parenting course, so we were being asked, how do I parent properly? And her husband was alcoholic, and she was a good Christian and wanted to maintain the Christian appearance. I mean, it's good to stay married, all right? I'm definitely not against that. And it's good to keep connected to your children, absolutely. But we were just talking about that situation, and I said to her, I said, what you need to do is you need to go into a dark room where you're not disturbed by anything, and you need to just wait for God, and you need to ask him one question, and that question is, what do you want me to do? Because we didn't have any answers. It's a hard place to be as a parenting advisor. How do you parent when your kids are in prison and your husband's alcoholic? Anyway, she did that. She came back the next week because it was multiple weeks, and said that she had left the home. And I asked her why, and she said, God said it's unsafe, leave. And that really shocked me, but it actually underlined what I'm saying here, is that we need to change our lifestyle if trauma is still happening. It's an idiot that keeps their hand in the fire while they're being burned, okay? But equally, I know people that are pretending that there's trauma when there's no trauma. So that's about being honest as well. So that aside, the second thing that that we need to be honest about is that hurts are there because we're not believing the truth. The truth is that we are whole, and hurts and wounds have happened to us. They're not part of us. And we believe the lie that somehow we deserved it, somehow other people's opinion of us have caused it, somehow I was destined to do this because my family line. I mean, I still do, I guess, but in my generations, I've had lots of alcoholics and broken marriages, and when I met people, I used to say things like, I come from a long line of alcoholics and wife beaters, and I thought it was funny. I have 5 generations of that, and I also think it's funny because I broke it in my generation. It hurt. It really was hard for me to do that, and I broke that that tendency in my family line, and it doesn't hurt anymore. Some lies that we could actually, all of these lies are things that I have believed in the past, and I've had to admit those to myself. I've had to admit. So when I tried to commit suicide, I had to think about that and go, why? You know, why did I do that? And that first one, I hate myself, and I had to admit that I hated myself. And so I stood in front of the mirror, and I said, you know, I love you, Keith, because that's the right thing to say. That is the truth. And that didn't make me feel at all good. So I asked myself, well, why do I feel that way? And this came out. I hate myself. I don't understand how to act because I have dyslexia, and socially dysfunctional because my family was socially dysfunctional. I am afraid and I cannot cope. So there's lots of lies that we can bring out. In fact, one of the exercises is to even go through some of these things that you kind of think of and go, does that apply to me? Does that apply to me? Does that apply to me? Because when we find the lie that applies, then we've just brought that thing into the light, and now we've got an opportunity to heal that, which is really good. In 1 John 4:18, love never brings fear, for fear is always related to punishment. But love's perfection drives the fear of punishment far from our hearts. Whoever walks constantly afraid of punishment has not reached love's perfection. So I'm saying that fear is coupled with a stronghold of a perversion of love. So when we don't love fully, or we haven't understood love, then fear comes in. It's like love has an area that it exists in, and if we've poked aside in that area and we've just pushed love out, or we haven't expressed love, then the bit that is a lack of love is fear. And this stronghold, this perverted love, that's kept secret because of this fear. And like I said, that freedom comes when we experience God's love for real. Okay, we can, with our minds, we can experience God's love, but emotionally we need to experience God's love, and emotionally we need to experience God's love in the emotion of the hurt. So, you know, I'm definitely not telling people to relive trauma. Do not ever do that. This is not about looking at the past, and it's not even about analyzing the past. Like I said, the emotion wants to have a reason for stuff, and in order to get healed, we have to defocus the reason and just accept that there is emotion there and allow God to touch that emotion. And healing comes when we believe and receive His love. And if think of somebody going to sleep. And when you lie in bed asleep, do you receive sleep by closing your eyes tight and straining, and you'll go to sleep that way? It doesn't happen that way. And if you have trouble sleeping, this is how to go to sleep. You go to sleep, you relax, and you let your heart talk. And what will happen is that your heart will go, I'm relaxed, I'll go to sleep. But this is the same with receiving God's love. When it's about actually relaxing. Now, one of the big things about a person's life and lifestyle is one of the ways that we keep things hidden is that we add another voice. So in this physical world, we have a lot of devices, and it's very common for people to be watching TV, to be reading a book, to be listening to YouTube, and to have Christian music going in the background in the other room. What we're actually doing is we're actually adding voices so that our hearts remain hidden, because our heart has a soft voice, a quiet voice. And if we want to hear what our heart's saying, we actually need to silence everything else that's going around. And in fact, if it's our spirit that talks to our heart and our heart talks to us, into our mind, when God wants to speak to us, he speaks through that heart. And if we've got other voices going on, then he's not going to be heard. And that's one of the primary things that stops people from growing, it stops people from receiving healing, is that they're too afraid to bring the noise level down. And I can tell you that part of receiving is relaxing, and relaxing means turning off all of the other dials that we've got going and turning them off, not telling them shut up, although sometimes I do that as well. It's not telling them they're wrong and arguing with them. It's not trying to validate anything. It's not trying to put them in the right place. It's trying to go to defocus. If you defocus on a sound, it will disappear. And it's that defocusing and that relaxing that actually allows us to experience God's love, and that's where healing comes. One of the things that I experienced in my marriage was that we were having a little bit of difficulty. Actually, I was having difficulty, and one of the things that I decided that I had to do was to spend time in quiet. So I, like this other woman, I stood quietly in a darkened room, and I just waited. And I just waited for whatever. And it's kind of just, I'm going to receive. I'm just going to wait. And after a while, and when I say a while, I mean 2 minutes, it's a long time for me. God says, do you love your wife? And because I was quiet and because I wanted to be honest, I said no. And I just continued to wait. And then I heard again, do you love your wife? And there's no accusation, no condemnation, no shame, no guilt, just the question. And I said no. Third time, do you love your wife? And something inside me just clicked, and I realized that this was an opportunity for me to change. This was an opportunity for me to confront something that was in my heart. And I said, yes, if you want me to. And people started to say, it was actually a couple of days later, someone said to me, "You have changed. What happened?" And I still don't know what happened, but I can honestly say that I love my wife, and I've never not loved her from that day.